225th day of the war. The US is pressuring Ukraine again instead of Russia. America has stopped the delivery of rockets, artillery shells, and ammunition for HIMARS from the already allocated aid. The key problem here is the PVO. There is simply nothing to replace American supplies. This will not lead to serious changes at the front, but is an invitation for Putin to shoot Ukraine even harder. Trump's decision will increase the number of victims in Ukrainian cities and bring down all the last steps that put Putin in doubt that Trump is helping him. Now Putin has no doubt about this. The Soviet Union was hit by an important plant in Izhevsk. Even blur did not help on the Yandex Maps. Ukrainian drones reached the goal and hit the elements of the Russian GDP. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed the attack on the Russian staff of the 8th General Army. Apparently it was in the result of this blow that a Russian colonel was killed, responsible for this particular army. Relations between Russia and Azerbaijan continue to deteriorate. Baku is getting stronger and stronger. Moscow continues to endure what causes anger from the channels. At the same time, the dictatorship is competing over who will beat the citizens of another country more. While two dictators are fighting with each other, the security forces are beating people. Macron called Putin for some reason. The conversation was no different from those that were before and did not bring any results. The leader of France is most likely trying to somehow raise attention to his persona at the moment, when Trump became the loudest in the topic of war in Ukraine. And the most reliable and serious partner of Kiev is the Chancellor of Germany, Merz. Macron says a lot and does very little. Attempting to draw attention to talks with Putin leads to nothing but irritation and disappointment. Let Scholz ask if there are any doubts. Leonid Pasechnik again stated that Russia has captured the Luhansk region as a whole, and again it is denounced by the Russian Z channels, pointing out that this is not in accordance with the reality in the Soviet Union and controls some territory of the region. Z author Maxim Kalashnikov expressed indignation at the course of the military actions and the state of the Russian army. According to him, despite official statements about the offensive of the initiative from the Russian army, the real situation on the front line is far from optimistic polls. You can support this and much more in today's fresh poll. You can support it with your like, comments, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video. Especially your subscriptions are important for YouTube algorithms. You can support the channel of finance on Patreon, the link to which is in the description, and by buying NVPN. This is a means to bypass blockages that allow you to bypass blockages. You can watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, use Instagram, go to resources that are blocked, and soon there will probably be the same problems with Telegram. Here are the news that Telegram and WhatsApp were blocked as part of tests in order to understand whether it will be possible to do this in order to promote the Russian Guzmash, even Max or whatever it's called. Therefore, VPN is needed by any person in any case. A link to my particular VPN and to the VPN in the description. Actually, I'm responsible for it with my head, and by buying it, you support this channel. It's legal in Russia to use VPNs and their purchase. Well, we move on to what happened in the past 24 hours. Pentagon stopped the supply of key weapons for Ukraine. The US suspended the supply of weapons for Ukraine because of the concerns about the loss of supplies in the Pentagon. According to this policy, this decision was made by the Deputy Defense Minister of the US, Elbridge Colby, after the inspection of the warehouse of weapons and the concern about the reduction of their volume. Moreover, the decision was made in early June, but it came into force only now. I remember saying to you already during the announcement of the future composition of the Trump administration that it would be bad news, since this character is extremely anti-Ukrainian, so he waited almost half a year before doing what otherwise you would not call a hit in speed, expected but a hit. PBS reports the following list of weapons that were under the restriction of the PVO PAK-3 missile for the Patriot ZRK, the AM-7 PZRK Stinger, as well as the MLRS, Hellfire, and 155 shells. The Deputy Press Secretary of the White House commented on stopping the supply in the following way. This decision was made to put the interests of the United States in the first place after the analysis by the Ministry of Defense of the entire military support and assistance that our country gives to other states of the world. This is a very bad decision, and here's why. Let's take even as an axiom the strategy of America first, America above all. Even in this case, the strategy of the US should be to contain its potential opponents from the breaching of American interests around the world. Let's say even that Ukraine does not fit into the sphere of these interests, as Colby believes, although America has concluded a resource deal with Ukraine, which automatically puts what is happening in Ukraine in the interests of the United States. Let's say it doesn't fit, but even in this case, US opponents will focus on the fact that America, in the first convenient case, will throw their allies and customers, as it has already happened with Afghanistan and is now happening with Ukraine, and that America is only hitting those who cannot hand over America, specifically such as Iran, and therefore, in the first convenient case, you can strike American interests. For US opponents, there is no difference how many rockets and shells are in American arsenals, if America, most likely, will not use them anyway. Therefore, the accumulation of Pentagon reserves does not contribute to deterrence at all, unlike the supply to allies and partners, which directly increases the costs for current aggressors and makes future aggressors think 10 times before trying for the interests of the United States. However, all these discussions make sense only if you assume that Colby and Trump act in the interests of the United States, and this, as the Americans say, is a very big if. Of course, you can spend time explaining to you that the United States does not need 155 shells since they do not carry out and do not plan to carry out any land operations, especially with the use of such artillery. But why? The decision is political and has nothing to do with the defense capabilities and needs of America. What does it all mean in practice? Firstly, we return to the basic scenario that we talked about with you since November: President Trump's refusal to support Ukraine in all manifestations. Secondly, of all the cancelled, the most important thing is the missiles for the PVO Patriot system. There is nothing to replace them, and this means that in the foreseeable future Ukraine will not have the opportunity to knock down the ballistics in the necessary volumes. Will this affect the front line? Not much. The decision approved by Trump will affect only one thing: the number of civilians killed. This decision is an invitation to Putin to shoot Ukraine more. HIMARS shells with 155 ammunition now have no key importance for the Soviet Union. These are good, effective things, but up to 80% of the losses of Russian soldiers and vehicles are now produced by UAVs. In short, will it lead to a reduction in U.S. aid to the capitulation of Ukraine or the collapse of its front, which Trump would very much expect and how he would like to help Putin? No, it will not. This scenario is not considered, but it will definitely lead to an increase in the number of victims among civilians due to the fact that there is nothing to replace the rocket for the PVO. Ugly, nasty, and harmful for America itself. Once again, a disgrace to the American contemporaries who do not understand what they are doing and what consequences it will have for them and the whole world. Not to mention that after the U.S. actions in Iran, Putin has noticeably pressed, changing the rhetoric, and as if seriously considering the risk of pressure from the United States. This could lead to real negotiations in the foreseeable future, but the current actions of Trump have this whole effect nullified. Putin can breathe again and is now clearly sure that the United States will not do anything to him and will only press on Ukraine. This will not lead to Putin's victory, but will lead to more deaths. The Russian-Azerbaijan conflict in turn does not intend to stop in Azerbaijan. On the official level, it has been proved that 2 Azerbaijanis who died during the raid of Russian security forces became victims of torture and beatings. Prosecutor General's Office of Azerbaijan has aroused a criminal case about a conspiracy murder with special cruelty and torture of citizens of the country during the raid of security forces in Yekaterinburg. According to the Prosecutor General's Office of the country, the crimes were committed by the FSB, the Russian National Guard, and the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia. Akkad also announced the results of the court medicine examination. The victims were found with numerous injuries from the blows, which became, as follows from the results of the court medicine examination, the cause of the death of the victims. I will not translate the description of torture here. If you wish, you can Google it yourself. And I will emphasize it again separately. The question is not whether the victims were killed by members of criminal groups. The question is whether they were murdered without weapons, even, let's say, criminals, and whether they were killed. The entire mass of direct and indirect evidence says that yes, and that other people, even Russian security forces, did not present any claims to them. Therefore, those who are trying to translate this topic into the course of you are defending criminals, manipulate, and ignore the essence of what has happened. In the press release, the General Prosecutor's Office of Azerbaijan clarifies that in fact there are other citizens of the Azerbaijani Republic who were caused by physical damage to various degrees of gravity as a result of the same tortures applied to numerous other persons, obtained by the Russian Federation's authorized operative investigation bodies. Meanwhile, the Syrskyi Paradise Court of Baku arrested 2 of 8 Russians for 4 months, whom the Azerbaijani Ministry of State detained on charges of involvement in the Communist Party of the Russian Federation after the diplomatic conflict between Moscow and Baku. The PO agency and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs report on this. Soon the court will have to make a decision on the remaining 6 Russians, most likely by the time you watch the report. I have already taken it and there is no doubt about it. Their names are not mentioned. The media publish photos and videos near the court and from the court hall. On the footage, it can be seen that young men are badly beaten up. The security forces use violence against them when moving. According to the MBD version of Azerbaijan, 8 Russians allegedly consisted of 2 criminal groups and were engaged in smuggling and online extortion of drugs from Iran. Important story has been established that at least 2 of them are Russian IT guys, relacants. This is a 41-year-old graduate of the Dresden University of Applied Science Anton Drashev, founder of the successful Russian IT startup Arrow, as well as a 30-year-old programmer Dmitry Viziglai. who worked at the Yandex VK. The faces of the other detainees are covered with bruises, so it was not possible to identify them immediately at the time of recording the report. The authorities of Azerbaijan do not reveal their names. That is, Baku answers as it seems to them, but in fact, this is not the case. These dictatorships do not hit each other but people, and the same claims that there are relevant and Azerbaijani to Russian security forces. Do you want to answer Russia? Send an embassy, break contracts, block the channels of the export service to Russia, announce Putin in the search in the end, or specific Russian security forces. But no, Baku prefers to just beat people too. And once again, I emphasize I am not talking about their guilt or innocence. I am talking about the impossibility of beating and torture against suspects. They are all the same, and in this aspect, Aleph is not much different from Putin. Yes, Azerbaijan did not attack Ukraine, and moreover, even in fact supports it, for which Azerbaijan is very grateful. But Azerbaijan recently started military action. In any case, there are no things that could justify the actions of the Azerbaijani security forces, clearly sanctioned from above. Can you arrest people you suspect in something? Yes, if there is a weighty basis. Did Russia have a weighty basis to arrest those they arrested, or did Baku have a basis to arrest those they arrested? I can't check, I don't know. But whatever the suspicions, the security forces and the state have no right to carry out and allow torture. The court in Baku also sent the director of the Russian state agency, Azerbaijan, Igor Kartovich, and chief editor Evgeny Belousov to the detention center. After all, in Russia at the same time, they detained Voronezh entrepreneur of Azerbaijani origin, Yusuf Kalilov, who is called the owner of the Alexeyevsky market, who is watching from the Azerbaijani diaspora, and the head of the Azerbaijani diaspora on the Urals, Shakin Sheklinsky, along with his son. As a result, they were released. If we turn to the political aspect, forgetting for a long time that we are talking about human life, Baku is going on agitation and demonstratively ignores the whole conciliatory rhetoric of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Peskov, and other representatives of the Russian Federation. Those representatives, in turn, look all the weaker. Zetniks, for example, are angry with the helplessness of the Russian authorities. They constantly offer options to increase the response pressure on the side, but the Russian authorities, on the other hand, avoid any escalation instruments, trying to reduce the degree of conflict. If we say that the Zetniks are so annoying in their terms of patience, then there is nothing to say. There are much more serious expressions, but maybe we will talk about this with you in the evening. Meanwhile, an even more interesting event took place during the conflict. The Azerbaijani newspaper published a leaked explanation by the Russian captain about the attack on the Azal plain. He confirmed that he wrote such a document. Judging by this report, the military had all the data to understand that they were firing not at the Ukrainian drone, but at a civilian plane. In the explanation, Captain Dmitry Polodichuk told how he received an order to fire the Azal plane in December 1924 during the drone attack on Grozny, and, in turn, passed this order to the operator. The explanation does not mention the plane itself. It is said that the detection station has identified a potential target, which was not visible because of the fog. It was taken to the MLRS, which Captain Polodichuk reported to the Military Command Center of the 51st Division, and passed the altitude, as well as the speed of the object. On the phone, the captain received a command to destroy the target, after which he gave the operator a command to shoot. The first rocket did not hit the target. Polodichuk gave the command to shoot again. In the order of the insider, there is a record of the phone conversation from July 1, in which Polodichuk confirmed that he wrote an explanatory command to the army after shooting the plane, since he demanded and confirmed the peculiarity of his handwriting, for example, the characteristic writing of the letter Yo. In addition, the voice of Polodichuk is identical to the voice in the video published by the Azerbaijani media. The videos show how the order for firing was given. Most likely, the document was handed over to Russia and Azerbaijan as part of the investigation of the incident. The explanation itself is not a sensation. The fact that the plane crashed due to the work of the PVO was known earlier and installed quite quickly, aside from the fact that the official Russian channels denied it at first. However, for the first time, the name of the military who received the order to destroy the target and gave the order about 2 strikes is published. There's only one strange detail in the description, the speed of the target. Judging by the numbers that Captain Polodichuk gave the command, it could not be a drone at such a speed of 120 meters per second, 432 kilometers per hour, and at such a height of 8 kilometers, drones do not fly. Thus, the military had all the data to understand that this is a certain plane, not a drone. Meanwhile, Vladimir Zelensky called Aliyev, which in this situation cannot be called as Putin's trolling. He had a conversation with the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, Zelensky wrote in social networks. He thanked him for the support of Ukraine, our people, and our territorial integrity. He also expressed clear support from the country of Ukraine in a situation when Russia is mocking the citizens of Azerbaijan and threatening the Republic of Azerbaijan. He expressed our condolences to Azerbaijan in connection with the murder on the territory of Russia and the brothers in Safrov. I am sure that all the facts will be explained and justice is necessary. We have a single vision of life and dignity for President Aliyev. Each person should be protected. We also discussed our bilateral relations, energy, and cooperation in the humanitarian sphere. We agreed to hold a joint intergovernmental commission on economic cooperation. Our government is activating the work, said Zelensky. Aliyev, of course, must be immensely grateful to Zelensky and the Ukrainian people as a whole, precisely thanks to the fact that they did not give Putin to take Kiev in 3 days. The Kremlin has given up all resources for the war with Ukraine and now cannot answer Baku in any way, except for the symmetrical detention and mockery of the Russian Azerbaijanis. Let's hope that Aliyev realizes that the further sovereignty of Azerbaijan directly depends on the outcome of the Russian-Ukrainian war and in the future will increase the help to Ukraine, although Baku regularly sends humanitarian goods to Kiev for millions of dollars, according to some rumors and weapons. And if we go back to the political aspect and return to the human one, I hope that Aliyev will also realize that if he wants to actually counteract Russia, increase the degree of conflict and so on, he has full right to do so, but this should not be in a simple beating of citizens and torture against them. There are many tools to harm Russia and the Putin regime if Aliyev wants to demonstrate that they are not the vassals of the Kremlin and are not going to play the role of the younger brother. This is generally a decent start, but the way Azerbaijan is doing it now in this part, in my opinion, is absolutely unacceptable and should be stopped. This practice has been changed because it is simply monstrous. Macron, why did you call Putin again? Putin and Macron talked on the phone for the first time since 1922. Moreover, if you read the message in the press service, you will not understand why. The conversation continued for more than 2 hours, said the Élysée Palace. As reported by the Kremlin's press service, it discussed the war in Ukraine and the situation in the Middle East in the context of the conflict between Iran and Israel and the blow to the United States and the Iranian object. Putin again accused the policy of Western states in the Ukrainian conflict, which, according to him, created an anti-Russian placard in Ukraine, blah blah blah, supported the violation of the rights of Russian-speaking residents. In addition, he impregnated the West in delaying military actions by supplying weapons to Ukraine. Putin again stated that it was necessary to eliminate the root cause of the conflict and rely on reality on the ground, the Kremlin reported. Well, that is, he called for Putin to be shot again, because it is he who does not rely on reality on the ground and is the root cause of the conflict. In turn, Emmanuel Macron once again confirmed the unfavorable support for France and sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, blah blah blah, reports the press service of the French leader. He called for the establishment of a ceasefire regime and the start of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia as soon as possible. During the conversation, the situation around Iran was touched. Putin and Macron, reports the Kremlin website, agreed that Iran has the right to a peaceful atom, but must fulfill the obligations imposed by the agreement on the non-distribution of nuclear weapons. At the end of the conversation, the presidents agreed to call again to continue exchanging opinions. I'm sorry that it's so boring to talk about this, but I don't understand why to exchange opinions that both leaders have already expressed 100 times on different platforms. If Macron has nowhere to spend 2 hours, then let Trump call and explain that because of the decision to stop the supply of key weapons to Ukraine, he looks weak and unsuccessful. In general, Macron somehow got lost in today's realities. Most of all, Trump creates noise, and the most decisive supporter of Ukraine, not in words but in fact, is MLRS. It seems that Macron somehow tries to return himself to the theme of war in Ukraine. At the same time, there is no sense in his actions. There were many words but no result. The European contingent to bring peacekeeping forces to Ukraine has not been created, and the project is apparently buried. The buildup of supplies from France is not visible. The transfer of Liklarkov is also not observed. So far, we do not dethrone Macron from the elephants, but we put up a fight, a lot of noise, little sense. But there is a lot of sense from the direct support of the Ukrainian defenders, which we continue to carry out. More than 3/4 of the assembly has already been closed, so I hope that today we will finish it. Let me remind you of the RZO mobile complex on the basis of a pickup. All this is to destroy the occupants. I remind you of a request from the guys and a video with a demonstration of what they are going to do. We want to call again for help in the purchase of a mobile RZO on the basis of a powerful pickup. This technique will make our intelligence more effective and effective for the Russian occupant. Glory, glory, there is a QR code on the monobank in the description of the monobank. Private, PayPal and cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin, USDT, TRC20 and Ethereum. Let's support the Ukrainian defenders together. Regardless of the US supplies or whatever else, only the Ukrainian defenders hold on to the essence of Ukraine. Well, now let's move on to the Ukrainian blows. In the morning of July 1, at least 2 drones attacked the Izhevsk electromechanical plant, QPOL, with a difference of 5 minutes, the eyewitnesses reported. Astrek raided the place of the drone hits in Izhevsk and came to the conclusion that the dome was attacked. On its territory, there is a characteristic high pipe which can be seen in several videos. The plant is located not far from the embankment of the river. In addition, the high building with brown inserts can be seen on the video. This is the 7A house, 30 years of victory on the street. It is located literally in 1/4 from the dome. Izhevsk electromechanical plant QPOL is one of the largest enterprises of the Russian defense industry, created in 1957. It produces the Torum Tui RK, as well as the Saman M1 and Adjutant Training Complex, and produces them in service. Director of the company, Fanil Zaidanov, reported in an interview with the Russian newspaper in 1923. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine in July 1923, according to Reiter, the factory started producing strike UAVs, GARP A1, using engines from China. December 16, 1922, QPOL was included in the U.S. sanctions list, as it is responsible for supporting actions that undermine or threat territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine, in particular for the supply of weapons to Russian armed forces, which is used during the attack on Ukraine. On a similar basis, the plant is included in the U.S., Canada, Ukraine, and Switzerland sanctions list. On November 24, Ukrainian UAVs had already attacked QPOL, then the worker was wounded, Astro wrote. As Astro told the locals, the air alarm before the attack of UAVs on the QPOL plant in Izhevsk did not sound, and the locals also could not read about the threat of an attack of UAVs in the telegram and the interruption with the mobile internet. The connection in Izhevsk has been silenced for almost 2 weeks. As a result, 3 people were killed and another 35 were injured, said the head of the region. Apparently, it is about the employees of the enterprise, and here I can only repeat that working for the Russian defense in the conditions of war is dangerous for your health, and in the conditions of the lack of workforce in Russia, finding a safer vacancy will certainly not be difficult. The sources in the SBU told the BBC that the operation was carried out by long-range drones of the Special Services, separately indicating that they had to overcome as many as 1,300 kilometers from the border. Each such special operation reduces the offensive potential of the enemy, violates the chains of military production, and demonstrates that even in the deep south of Russia there are no safe zones for its military infrastructure, said the source in the SBU. Analyst Tadorigami separately noted that the QPOL factory was among the enterprises blurred on the Yandex cards. I remind you that considering that these factories are not blurred in Google, such a policy helps Ukrainian planners and analysts. If we see blurred in Yandex, then this is definitely an important factory that would be good to hit. Also, according to the sources of Astra in the industry services of the Saratov region, drones in the morning of July 1 attacked the Saratov oil processing plant. BBPAs fell on the territory of the enterprise. No damage, the plant continued its work. This is not the first. The attack on the enterprise resembles Astro, as in February 25, as a result of a blow to the MPP, a low-pressure gas pipeline was damaged, the object's operation was suspended, the sources of Astro said. Before that, the plant was attacked in January 25. Well, we wish the Ukrainian deep strike operators good luck next time. General Staff confirmed that they struck on June 30 at the headquarters of the 8th General Army. On June 30, the self-defense forces successfully struck on the command post of the 8th General Army of Russian Armed Forces at the time of the occupied territory of the Donetsk region, the military department reported. Where exactly was the strike, it is not specified, but it is obvious that this is a rocket strike on Donetsk in the evening of June 30. Then some channels called the headquarters of the 8th Army as one of the intended goals, and now this information has been confirmed. At the moment, the loss of the enemy is clarified. They continued in the General Staff. This high-precision blow significantly complicates the ability of the enemy to plan and carry out operations in the direction of Pokrovskoe and Toretsk, concluded the Ukrainian military. On this background, it is more likely to look like the necrology of the discovered Astra. On June 30, the commander of the 8th Guard General Army of the Guard, Colonel Ruslan Goryachkin, died in a temporary duty in the Donetsk direction, reported by the Abkhazian Telegram channel Ampo Live. Since Goryachkin was born and grew up dry in Syrskyi, excuse me, the circumstances of his death are not disclosed in the message. Ukrainian war explorer Anatoly Stefan also points out that Goryachkin was killed, emphasizing that the information requires clarification. On June 30, Ukrainian forces hit Luhansk on a series with UAVs. As a result, fires began. Local gallator Leonid Pasechnik reported the fall of debris on the oil base and the residential sector. Judging by the scale of the consequences, the debris this time turned out to be of special power. Ukrainian forces strike at an operational depth. So recently, a bridge was pierced by a hit by HIMARS. Readings from 2022. The strike was geolocalized to the north of the occupied Vasilivka in the Zaporozhye region. This should worsen the logistics of Russian troops, which carry out assault actions in the north of Kamensk. Russian road and road logistics in the occupied territory of the Zaporozhye region also continue to suffer, said Inguri. After a series of successful drone strikes on Russian trains, Ukrainian partisans entered the case, intelligence reports. Another successful operation of the resistance movement by Russian occupiers in cooperation with the Gura of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. On June 26, 1925, at the time of the occupied territory of the Zaporozhye region, a railroad dam was destroyed as a result of an explosion, said Inguri. The movement in the area, which the Russian invaders actively used for logistics, was paralyzed for more than a week. On July 1, 1925, the Muscovites restored the slabs and rails, launched a military composition, but another railroad collapse occurred in the Ukrainian Gorky. The enemy locomotive was brought into service. One of the key logistics branches of the occupation army in the Zaporozhye region was again blocked. The fight against the Russian impurity continues. Glory to the Ukrainian partisans, glory to Ukraine, they write. In the morning of July 1st, the occupants attacked the Gulipolye and the Dnipropetrovsk region with ballistic missiles, reported the defense forces of the south. According to preliminary data, the Russians made a strike with the use of 2 Skanderem missiles. As a result of the shelling, there are dead and wounded among the local population. In addition, the House of Culture, 2 shops and damaged private houses were destroyed. By evening, it became known that in the course of the strike on Gulipolye, Colonel Sergei Zakharovich, a colonel of the 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade, died. Vladimir Zelensky reported on this in an evening address. Unfortunately, in this war, no one is insured from high-precision strikes at the headquarters. The only reliable way to protect yourself is to strike with the Russian ballistic launchers and increase the pressure, which will not allow you to further increase the production of missiles. Another way to reduce losses from Russian strikes is to observe safety measures. Let me remind you that the chronic supervision of these measures has several times led to the death of Ukrainian soldiers during strikes at training camps and training grounds. This led to the fact that Major General Mikhail Drapetov resigned from the post of commander of the High Command of the Soviet Union. Since then, the problem has obviously not been solved, and now it has been recognized by the head of the Soviet Union, Syrskyi, writing in another report about his work as follows. I heard reports about the implementation of events to protect training centers from air and missile strikes of the enemy. My unconditional demand is to ensure and increase the safety of military personnel in training centers and on training grounds. The collection of personnel and military equipment and the deployment of military personnel in city centers is prohibited. New shelters, dugouts, and other protective structures are set up at the training sites. Additional engineering solutions are implemented to protect our soldiers who are preparing for training and recovery. I especially emphasize the mandatory compliance with the requirements for the equipment of shelters in training centers and on training grounds, as well as the correct and timely notice of air alarm. Let's hope that all this will not remain only on the words of the Ukrainian pilot Sergei Sternenko loves to say, let's change or let's die. In this case, this can be understood literally. The U.S. has long seen the need for changes, and we are talking here not only about the protection of the personal composition at the training centers. In the Nizhny Novgorod region, during a training flight, a fighter Su-34 crashed, reports the Ministry of Defense of Russia. The ministry clarified that during the landing, a failure in the launch system of one of the landing gear failed. The aircraft crew managed to catapult. The pilot survived. The navigator, according to the mesh, unsuccessfully landed after catapulting and died from the injuries. The flight was carried out without a combat suit. The plane fell into a deserted area. There is no destruction on the ground, the Ministry of Defense reported. Earlier, the Telegram channel of the base reported that the plane fell in the area of the city of Kulibaki. Along with the losses at the Ukrainian strike on the Myrnohrad airfield in the Volgograd region, this is the 6th lost Su-34 in the last week. Let me remind you that this is now the most important VKSRF aircraft. It is they who launch air bombs that are planned in Ukrainian cities and combat positions, the protection from which has not yet been found. The Su-34 park is quite limited, so any losses can negatively affect the frequency of air bombs, which can't but delight. The Security Service and the SBU reported the suspect involved in the murder of Ukrainian prisoners of war at the Volchansk aggregate plant, according to the Kharkov Regional Prosecutor's Office. The suspect is a 36-year-old junior sergeant with the nickname Altai. He's a sniper of the 1st Motorized Rifle Battalion, the 82nd Motorized Rifle Regiment, the 69th Motorized Rifle Division, and the 6th Army of the Leningrad Military District of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, which served as the deputy commander of a group of soldiers deployed at the captured Volchansk aggregate plant. During the repeated offensive of the aggressor on Kharkiv in May-September of 2024, under his actual leadership and under the order of the senior command, Ukrainian prisoners of war were killed. The first case was recorded on June 16, 1924. Military officer Grontomenchuk, having lost his orientation in the combat zone, accidentally came out on the positions of the Russian occupiers, who at that time controlled the territory of the plant. The lack of weapons and the number of enemies of the enemy forced the Ukrainian soldiers to surrender. After the interrogation, which was carried out by the personally suspected along with other occupiers, the received information was handed over to the command, after which an order was issued to kill the prisoner. The figure was suggested by one of the subordinates as an executor. In detail, he instructed him, chose a place to shoot, a checkpoint on the territory of the factory, and personally provided cover. The Ukrainian soldiers were shot in the head with a machine gun. The next episode is the events of July 23, 1924. During the battle in the Balchansk region, 2 Ukrainian soldiers were captured by the Russian troops. They were taken to the factory, where they were tied to a pole in the room of the so-called admin. After the interrogation, the figurant handed over the received information to the commander, who in turn again gave the order to kill the prisoners of war with the words, "Send them to Myrnohrad." This time, the suspect personally participated in the murder. Together with the military officer, with a call code, he agreed on the plan of the execution. Everyone had to kill one of the prisoners. On July 3, Altai and his accomplice took out 2 Ukrainian defenders. Each of them was shot in the back of the head by automatic weapons. After the execution, the prisoners were left in the crime scene. On September 24, the Special Forces of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, during the successful completion of the operation to liberate the territory of the Volchansk aggregate plant, captured Russian soldiers, including Altai. They were taken to one of the prefrontal cities of the Kharkov region, where prosecutors conducted their initial interrogation in order to establish all the circumstances. The discovery of military crimes. In addition, investigative actions are carried out in order to identify the persons who gave orders about the murder of the prisoners of war. As a result of the check of the evidence collected, these persons will be informed in person about the suspicions. The results have already been achieved in this direction. The investigation continues. I hope that the occupants who gave orders to kill the prisoners of war will also be punished. It is advisable to enter a fair trial, although here, of course, as it turns out, the difference between Ukrainian and Russian soldiers is once again noticed. Even knowing that a person killed their fellow soldiers, executed their fellow soldiers, he is still brought to court well as before the legal procedure. They are killed on the spot, not forgotten on the spot, and so on. Would I be able to hold out in such situations? I don't know. I hope I will never find out. On the eastern flank, the Pokrovskaya direction, Deep State fixes the occupation by the Russians of Koptivo, as well as the advance in the area of Myrny and Razin. The FSRF continues to approach Myrnohrad from the east in the hope of taking the Pokrovsko-Myrnohrad agglomeration and putting its supply routes under fire control, although this scenario is still far away. On the western flank, according to this project, the Russians have advanced in Novoseljivka. In this area, the fights are actually going on at the border with Dnipropetrovsk region, says the Ukrainian military author of the Telegram channel officer. At the Dnipropetrovsk region, near Novoseljivka and Novoniklivka, the entire theater of military actions actually passes directly along the administrative borders of the regions. Russians try to break through on motorcycles and cars through the fields, or go through the landings on foot, and in some places they succeed. Therefore, at this site, the situation is slightly different from what is displayed on the maps. However, after leaving these borders, the activity of Russian armed forces has decreased a little, so the situation has become more or less controlled, says the officer. The city of Toretsk does not give up, but in the neighboring Toretsk direction, according to Deep State, the Russians have advanced in the area of the northern suburb of Toretsk, Delivka, as well as in Toretsk itself, in the Zabalka micro-district. Neither this micro-district nor the city as a whole, Russian armed forces, is still completely out of control, although the Ministry of Defense has declared its take on it almost 5 months ago. Now let's move on to the most alarming part for Ukrainian armed forces. In the critically important southern Donetsk direction, Deep State notes the progress of the Russians in the area of Vasilevo and Kamara. On one of the areas on this direction, above the units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, there was a threat of encirclement, the officer warns. As of yesterday, that is, on June 30, the Russians flew into Petrovno and Voskresenka, he writes yesterday, if the USRF manages to secure itself and attract additional forces for the development of success. The matter will begin to smell like beep, although, in my opinion, it already smells like beep. One look at the map that the officer brings is enough to understand what he means. In principle, there are only fields in this vacuum in which it will be difficult to defend from 3 sides, to clarify the officer. It remains to be hoped that the team representing this direction of the 20th Army Corps will also see the situation and will take measures to restore the position or a timely departure from the potential pocket. The head of the so-called LNR, Leonid Pasechnik, announced the complete liberation of the Republic, which time. This caused a storm of indignation in the Z channel, since the statement of Pasechnik, to put it mildly, again does not correspond to reality. Ivan Filipov collected the Z reaction, the author of the channel on the Western Front, without changes. They say that the LPR is completely liberated. What an unexpected news. Now finally you can drive to Peligorovka, breathe fresh air in the Kremlin forest, writes the military corps of Alexander Simonov. He is also a call named Bruce, reciting the territory of Luhansk, which is still not controlled by Russia. Unfortunately, I cannot agree with this statement, comments military blogger Yuri Podolyak about the statement of Pasechnik, and we will not even talk about our own territories. In many places, the Kremlin forests, the same as in Grekovka, some parts have not yet been liberated, unfortunately. In one large settlement, Novgorod has not yet been liberated. Yes, and according to official reports, its liberation took place last autumn, but it was fake. This settlement is still recognized by the enemy, by Alia. It turns out that the head of the LPR ran ahead of the steam locomotive again. Probably even someone under the pretext of the hero of the LPR, leaving a message in secret about the complete liberation of the territory of the LPR. The LPR is distributed in accordance with the facts. Places in the Kremlin and Serebryansk forests, as well as adjacent borders of the areas in the region of Nacke, Novgorodka and Grekovka are not yet liberated, according to the Agoniak Donbas channel. The complete liberation of the LPR is, of course, bent. There is still a decent rate that does not correspond to the facts, writes the call sign Leon. The territory of the LPR is completely liberated, said the head of the region, Leonid Pasechnik. We advise Pasechnik to personally drive through the LPR and make sure in his own words. Otherwise he will suddenly make a mistake, says the author of the channel, Soldiers of Good Luck. I can only add that in a situation when even the Russian command of false reports does not have an adequate understanding of the situation at the front, it is difficult to expect the same from the civilian administration as the occupational administration. Although maybe he is aware and just decided to lie for some reason. Anyway, no one will check it anyway. Deep state analysts showed the results of the Russian promotion in June, which turned out to be quite unsatisfactory, although not catastrophic. This is what the authors of the project write. In June, Russian armed forces occupied 556 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. This is the worst indicator in the 25th year. The dynamic of May, unfortunately, was preserved in June. Let us remind you that in the most critical for us in November, the Russians advanced to 730 square kilometers. The biggest promotion was made in the Novopavlovsk and Pokrovsk directions, 29.27%. Accordingly, the number of leaders was reduced to 18. That is, 3/4 of the entire promotion had to be made into 3 sections. The last quarter was divided between the remaining sections of the front almost equally, 4.6 for each section. The promotion of Russian armed forces was due to the frame problems, which are now critical for both sides, but the Russians obviously still have reserves of their own composition. A drop in the mechanization level is another confirmation of their problems with the equipment. Both of them are trying to replace motorcycles and bugs, and the assault actions by the forces of 1 or 3 infantrymen are no longer surprising. At the same time, the number of such groups remains significant, says Deep State. The main conclusion that can be made here is the Russian offensive in full swing, and it is difficult to predict when and where it will stop. However, there have been no decisive breakthroughs from the RF country or collapse of the Soviet Union country, despite the high intensity. And no matter how strange it may sound, the news is not bad. The stabilization is balanced, and the absence of sharp breakthroughs in the SRF shows that the Ukrainian defense forces have enough strength to hold the front. Now the main thing is to solve the problem in weak places, continue or speed up the implementation of the core system and the drone line, and stop the Russian offensive, destroying the last reserves of the Russians. By the way, do you believe my assessment of this offensive? Do you think I'm biased? Okay, let's see what the Z-actors say about the offensive. Z-actor Maxim Kalashnikov expressed indignation by the course of the military actions and the state of the army. According to him, despite the official statements about the offensive of the initiative from the Russian army, the real situation on the front line is far from optimistic conclusions. The offensive on Sumy is going on with monstrous difficulties. There the enemy was waiting for us. There he did not manage to build many fortifications, but he was waiting for us there, and there we are moving very hard. It is already visible that the so-called summer offensive, but there will be no triumphal breakthrough. What is wrong with the Russian offensive on Sumy can be learned from my video, but for now we will return to Kalashnikov. The expert emphasizes that in the troops there are tense relations between officers and the service personnel. According to the sources of Kalashnikov, the atmosphere there is extremely heavy. You know, the troops are very exhausted, very unpleasant processes are taking place there. I will not announce this now, but there is a very large flow of information. Bad information is coming. What kind of bullshit is there? What kind of pre-instruction? What kind of forcing is there? It is not right. Kalashnikov himself believes that an extremely dangerous and responsible moment is coming. The struggle is no longer for victory, but for the detention of Russia itself from the fatal outcome. Losses accumulate, foreign policy has failed, the situation at the front is extremely tense, the Allies do not help. Even in foreign policy, we must consider losses, record losses. Therefore, I say again that the moment is becoming extremely dangerous and responsible. For such words, Zetnik can be attacked. As for example, Mikhail Polynkov, whose detention after his visit to Slavyov we have not discussed for so long. Now on Polinkov's channel there's an update on the fate of the Opel Military Corps, apparently by the authorship of his wife Olga. Here's what she wrote. Lack of places or order. The situation with Mikhail Polynkov on July 1, 1925, the passing of the Military Medical Commission. I remind you that Mikhail left Donbass as a volunteer in 1922. At that time he was 50 years old. He was not mobilized and could not be at a certain age and lack of military record. At the age of 45, only the Soviet military ticket was withdrawn from the military record. The contract was not signed. No legal relations were mobilized, no contract was signed. In 1923, he was released as a volunteer for treatment of hepatitis C on June 18. At 8:45 a.m., the door to the apartment was broken. Without any charges and documents, people in civilian uniforms with masks on their faces enter the territory of the apartment, shake hands with the irresistible Mikhail, and are taken to the 517th high-rise of the city of Moscow, where he is sent to pass a military medical commission. On the basis of what? She asks the question. Mikhail agrees to pass VVK in the Preobrazhensky regiment, because under pressure, the possibility of passing VVK in the Preobrazhensky regiment at least leaves the possibility of contact with relatives and lawyers, until further investigation is carried out. VK is in a hurry. Instead of passing it on this Friday, they are assembling a commission today, on July 1. Despite all the list of diseases and age, Mikhail is placed in the category A, that is, a year old. In conclusion, it is written that VVK he passed as a mobilized decree of the President of the Russian Federation. The question is how and when he could be mobilized, if in the decree itself the characteristics according to which he could not be mobilized at that moment are written. Mikhail in a hurry sends the 28th Brigade to the village of Myrnohrad. The defense is preparing a hearing for review of the conclusions of the Military Medical Commission. Also, at the moment, the absurdity of violence in the places that I was so afraid of has become quite obvious. I ask for the help of the public. Because on the place of Mikhail Polynkov can be anyone who may not have close lawyers and friends. In fact, everyone has already been there. This is constantly happening, which I am telling you in the reports. Just this time the Zetniks paid attention to this because someone from their party got into the magazine of the Russian military machine. Nothing, they will pwn and forget. After Polynkov, the valiant Russian army does not want anyone. Well, that's what happens when they face reality. What can I suggest to Mikhail Polynkov? To desert, there are no other options but to give up Ukrainians. Well, I did not send you there in the popular column. A group of members of the SVO who have lost their limbs wrote a collective appeal to the President of the Russian Federation with a complaint on the actions of the medical social expertise, for which, since the spring of 1925, the group of disabled people returning from the front is massively reduced. For the last month, there has been a tendency to decrease the group of disabled people, which significantly worsens the social protection and quality of life of veterans. The fighter says that earlier, in similar cases, they were automatically assigned a second group of disabled people. Now, with the same injuries, they began to put a third group. This was done not only to lower the group of people with disabilities, but also to increase the social and medical benefits. These guys who have 2 legs are assigned a second group of disabled people. One of the disabled, Nikita Vladimirovich Burovtsov, was seriously injured 2 years ago. As a result, he lost his leg. All this time, similar injuries were associated with the second group of people with disabilities. Now, according to him, according to new internal regulations, the Commission assigned him a third group. Decreasing the group of people with disabilities not only violates our laws, but can also negatively affect society as a whole. So in the appeal, complaints were made on the lack of approval of veterans of combat actions, the inability to receive proper benefits, the lack of a single approach when considering the case of disabled people in the SVO. Well, in general, everything is as usual. Nikita also reported that the Federal Bureau of the Ministry of Internal Affairs explained to him the reason for the humiliation of the group of people with disabilities. As it turned out, this is done for the sake of saving a large number of people with disabilities who were injured during a special military operation. Fighters are required to stop the practice of humiliation of the group and conduct a check of all decisions taken out by the Ministry of Internal Affairs during the last month. I ask you to pay attention to this problem and take measures for a fair and objective review of the situation. Will there be any progress in this? Of course not. A man recorded a video address in the outskirts of the Pskov region, where there is a memorial complex dedicated to the deceased during the CPSU. The author of the video showed the condition of the plate and the very memorial complex, which is in a terrible state. That is, in fact, in the coffins themselves, the water flows, there is a landslide, the sand has settled. What is under this concrete, made for an ambulance, it is even difficult for me to say. According to him, the tile around the entire perimeter of the memorial is distinguished by the unnatural color, which may mean that it is of poor quality material or a violation of technology. It is seen, most likely, that the material is of poor quality. Of course, I have no right to judge, I am not a specialist in this, but please pay attention to the monument itself. Here are the tiles, I repeat, the same color on the other side. Serious questions were also caused by the condition of the concrete structure. The man pointed to the gaps under the foundation of the monument where the water stands. That is, all this concrete, it is not known what it is holding on to, but the sand has settled. And below the void, the holes are quite deep. That is, you see there's water there. The man clarifies that the holes can be drilled so that it does not catch the eye, but this does not solve the essence of the problem. The memorial was erected hastily and without proper control. Since we understand perfectly well that the object was handed over very quickly in a short period of time, therefore all these nuances are not favorable, they can be seen immediately. He called on responsible persons to pay attention to the situation and take measures to eliminate the problem. This is how there is no peace for Russian soldiers, neither in life in the troops, nor in injury, nor after death. And this is fair because they are aggressors, fascist occupants. Do not become a Russian soldier. If you became well, support the Ukrainian defenders. Michael Nacke was with you. All the best. Bye.